Hello, and welcome to our discussion titled Inside Claroty's Protection Platform for Cyber Physical Systems. My name is Mike Mimoso. I'm the Editorial Director at Claroty, and joining me is Grant Geyer. Grant is our Chief Product Officer, and today we're going to talk about a major announcement made last week by Claroty, introducing our new protection platform. It's a solution set that includes exposure management, network protection, secure access, and threat detection from either the cloud or on premises. Complementing that platform announcement last week was the publication of a new paper as well that challenges the notion that passive traffic collection and inspection should be the default standard for security programs protecting cyber physical systems. So that's where I want to start. Grant, it's good to see you. How are you doing?
Great, Mike. How are you?
Good, thank you. Big week for the company last week. Congratulations. I know this was a lot of work for you and your team and everyone else involved.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a lot of work kind of thinking about the hypothesis of where this was going to go, but also doing the research and pulling out the data. It validated a lot of our thinking, and I'm excited to share that with you today.
Great. So let's start with the paper, as I said, and you'll be able to download this from Claroty.com. The paper challenges the status quo, the architectural standard that exists today, that passive traffic collection and analysis, that approach. Explain from a high level maybe why passive has been the standard to date and why we believe that there are challenges there.
Yeah, now I'll just start off by saying that fundamentally, for viewers that aren't familiar with OT environments and OT technology, it's a culture of risk aversion, right? If you think about the IT world, it's a culture of change where change is encouraged. That's why we have DevOps in the cloud and fast development cycles. Change is a really good thing in IT, but in an OT environment, people can get hurt, things go boom, things go zap. There's production outages that can happen as a result of changes. And so the philosophy in OT is get it right, engineer it, and lock it down. And so change is avoided at all costs. And based upon that mindset, plus the fact that a lot of OT assets are not really built to be as robust as IT assets. They're sometimes as fragile as glass. Sending the wrong traffic to it can knock some of them offline. Based upon that, all of those conditions, passive has been the de facto standard, that you want to observe the traffic, not introduce traffic onto the network, break apart the packets on the network to understand the asset attributes, identify the OT assets, and build up your inventory from there. So that's been the traditional mindset and methodology, and it's been that standard for many, many years now. But that's starting to change. Now, what we've noticed in a lot of while it has those advantages of safety, part of the challenge of passive collection is that, first of all, it can be expensive. You have to have appliances or software running throughout the environment. And especially if you have small sites, such as like pipelines or oil rigs in oil fields, you may have to have a lot of appliances deployed throughout the environment. And so you have to have a choice. Do I deploy the appliances or do I miss visibility? So they can be expensive. Second is more and more traffic is moving to encrypted, like Siemens' new protocol S7 Plus is encrypted by default. SIP Secure from Rockwell is encrypted. And so if it's encrypted, you can't see the contents of it. Third is that some of the packets don't have the content you need, the asset attributes you need in them in order to determine if you have vulnerabilities. You're limited by what the automation vendor has decided to put on the network many years ago. An example here is Modbus by Schneider Electric. It doesn't have it doesn't have firmware, it doesn't have serial numbers, it doesn't have a lot of data that one needs to run an effective asset inventory program in OT. And finally, if you have Windows devices, through passive collection, you can tell that it's a Windows system, you can tell the Windows version, but you can't understand the patch level. And that's incredibly important to know, is this system insecure and vulnerable, especially given that so many of the KEVs, the known exploited vulnerabilities, are on Windows systems. So that's why we think it's time for a reconsideration of whether passive should be the market standard or not for collection.
And so why do we believe that the industry is ready or should be ready for this now? What has changed within these CPS environments, for example, to validate the use of non-passive collections?
So the environments are changing, mindset is changing, and the technologies that can be used other than passive have matured. So let's kind of dig into all three of those. First, in terms of the environments, uh, most new greenfield environments that are established now will be converged environments, meaning that the IT and OT assets, they will be segmented not physically but virtually through microsegmentation or some other type of segmentation technology. But more and more, the environments are becoming integrated and converged, right? And that's causing a mindset shift that it's really about architecture. It's not about everything OT is on this side of the transom, everything IT is on this side of the transom. So that's first. And with a converged environment, you can start to explore the use of other technologies. Second is in terms of mindset, right? That the traditional thinking that you can only use passive, there's a recognition that of these limitations, and there's a pragmatic understanding that these programs have to exist within a certain total cost of ownership framework, that you can't necessarily have all of the appliances or the full architecture that one might want. And so mindset is starting to have a more business-centric thought process to how this is done. And third, in terms of the tech, Claroty and a number of other providers in the space have been working on all of these other collection methods, active-based collective methods, safe queries, smart queries, agent-based collections such as Claroty's Edge. And through more and more opportunities to deploy them in the field, they've matured to the point where a lot of the risk concerns from years past have gone away. So all three of those factors, I think, really combine into the opportunity to relook non-passive collection methods.
Mm-hmm. This is a pretty bold claim we're making, a pretty bold approach, right?
Yeah, but it's not based upon hypothetical belief, or it's based
Right.
upon data, right? That's one thing that really kind of was important to us. So we actually did some analysis, and I think you have some of the data that maybe we can show. But we started developing a taxonomy that defined different levels of what we call visibility quality. And so there's 5 different levels: initial visibility, or sorry. The first level is unclassified. We only know that there's an asset there. The second level is initial visibility, that we know it's an IT, OT, or IoT device. Basic visibility is that we know the type of asset, meaning it's a building automation system, or it's a control system, or an imaging system. Full visibility means that we know the make, model, manufacturer of the device. And deep visibility refers to the fact that we see serial number, firmware number, rack slots, a lot of more detailed information than we can in the other 3 levels. And we analyzed a passive led approach versus non-passive collection. And what you see is the results are pretty much even. I mean, again, it's actually a little bit better for non-passive, but you can see essentially like between 85% on the left for passive led approaches, 87% on the right. And so what that tells us is, using different collection methods, passive versus non-passive, you can get to the same visibility quality. Now, of course, that the results will vary from organization to organization, but we think that we think that the data really shows us that this claim is not a hypothetical claim, but a very real claim, that organizations can get the visibility quality that they need to get to a good asset inventory, and do so in a way that doesn't require all of these different passive collection appliances.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's less expensive at the end. There's more value there, and you can reach a little better visibility without kind of those challenges that you mentioned earlier.
And it's not just that it's not as expensive initially. There's also the concept of total cost of ownership over time, right? Those appliances at some point, they need to be patched, they need to be replaced through hardware refresh, and so you're incurring kind of an ongoing cost to the business by accepting passive as the foundation. Now, I also want to stress that it's not, having a non-passive approach is not for everyone. You have to think about the environment. What are the organization's risk tolerances? Are there any constraints that force you to do, that won't allow you to do some non-passive collection methods? But I think also key to this is that, I think that it has to be kind of put front and center that if you want to see traffic patterns, you have to use passive collection to do that. If you want to be able to see the communications or threat detection, it's an essential starting point. That being said, most organizations, I'd say about 85 to 90% of the companies that I ran into, having threat detection is not the initial starting point for their program. The initial starting point is asset identification and vulnerability and risk management. Organizations don't need passive to do those, and you can always layer those on at a later point, or you do them at certain specific ingress, egress points within the environment.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you could explain, and you've mentioned like safe queries already in our discussion, but what does a non-passive collection approach look like?
Yeah, so where passive is around deep packet inspection, sorting through and breaking apart the packets and understanding the contents to divin like what the assets are. A non-passive approach, there's generally like 4 different categories that we think of here. The first is active queries. Claroty refers to them as safe queries. In essence, if you know what a target machine is, you can request information from that target machine the same way a human machine interface or engineering workstation would. And so you're in essence asking the machine in its own language, in its own protocol, to respond with all of the configuration items so you can get a detailed asset inventory. That's active querying. It's been around for, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years now. The second method is known as project files. And so certain engineering workstations contain these files that talk about how all the assets are distributed around the network. And so if you pull this file, you can get a good starting point for explaining the layout of the environment, really without any traffic on the wire at all, or without the need for passive collection. The third method is referred to, we call Claroty Edge. And this is, we think of it as kind of like the Swiss Army knife of collection methods. It goes through an algorithm of broadcasts, ping sweeps, kind of gets a detailed inventory of all the systems on the network, and then queries those systems in the same way active querying would, in its own protocol, in its own language, to build up that inventory. It can also get information from the host system it's deployed onto. And being endpoint based, again, there's no need for the deployment of hardware to use this method. Mm-hmm. It's I'd say really skyrocketed in terms of adoption within our client base. Second most active collection method. And the last one is integrations, taking data from DHCP, SNMP, CMDBs like ServiceNow or CMMS systems. All of these are great sources of information. And we basically leverage all of them to work in concert. Some customers use literally all of our collection methods and get to a really, really high visibility quality. But others choose either passive only or non-passive methods. Mm-hmm. So that's in summary all of the non-passive methods that we have for collection.
Sure. All right, so I want to spend the rest of our time talking about the platform in the few minutes we have left. And I think the paper does a really good job of kind of explaining the approach and the problem set that the platform tries to answer. Maybe you can just kind of, from a high level, take us through what we announced last week. I know we spent some time here at Claroty kind of reframing our approaches to exposure management, secure access, et cetera. Why does this platform approach make sense in CPS environments?
Yeah. So let me kind of outline. The announcement basically talked about the fact that organizations can benefit from the best total cost of ownership and the best time to value through a platform approach. And one aspect of this is getting value, instead of having a bunch of different point products around the environment, leveraging Claroty's platform so you can get not only all of this in one platform approach, but also there's combinational value, some use cases that you can get only by having all of these technologies delivered from one vendor. So that's kind of one point of it, is the combinational value. The second point is really around, again, total cost of ownership, time to value. And this, our argument here is that by using non-passive collection methods as a starting point, you can achieve a lot of the significant aspects of the initial stages of most customer aspects of the customer journey without the need for appliances, without the need for passive collection. And you can do so also and populate your system with a good asset inventory at a much faster cycle time than with a lot of different passive techniques. And we'll talk more about that.
Sure.
So let's maybe talk about each of these in terms of the platform approach. So Claroty delivers four key elements on top, four key offerings on top of our asset visibility. Exposure management, which again was one of our prior announcements. Network protection, which is the ability to understand traffic patterns and implement segmentation through microsegmentation tools or firewalls or NACs. Third is around threat detection, so the ability to understand incidents occurring in the environment. And the final one is secure access. That was our xDome secure access, and that's ensuring that third parties can get access to their cyber physical systems in a frictionless and secure manner. So those are kind of the four areas. Now, each one of them in and of themselves is important in terms of understanding and mitigating risk, detecting threats, and providing secure access. But what we thought about is that there's a lot of combinational value that you can get by having this from one vendor. And specifically, customers, if they use xDome or CTD, they have the full asset inventory with Claroty. And when you have the asset inventory and you have third parties that need to access those devices, you can establish what are known as birthright entitlements. So a Rockwell engineer, by default, you can set the attributes on an asset and give the Rockwell engineer by default access to Rockwell assets. And that's referred to in identity management terms as a birthright entitlement, that by default, that person gets that access. So Rockwell engineer gets access to Rockwell devices, Schneider engineer gets access to Schneider devices. And if one needs to make an exception and give the Rockwell engineer access to another device, you can do that, but an exception gets raised because that's a violation of the standard policy. And so management would have to sign off on that. And then later on, when an auditor comes in and they say, hey, this individual shouldn't have access to a non-Rockwell device, it's a Rockwell employee, the OT manager can then say either sign off on the exception and say that, and therefore there's an audit log that the manager has approved it, or the manager can say, you know what, the access isn't appropriate, and can enforce least privilege access. All of this is referred to as identity governance, being able to get visibility in who has access to what, and ensure that that visibility is appropriate for the roles and responsibilities and the access that the individual needs. All of this together helps an organization operationalize their third-party risk management process, which is probably one of the single biggest reasons why breaches occurs through third-party access. So that's what we're delivering through the combination. We have the database, we know the users, birthright entitlements, and the ability to do identity governance. So that's a mouthful, but that's kind of one of the areas. The second, as I think we've talked a lot about, is around the research that we've done. We recommend, again, based upon an organization's operational constraints, environmental constraints, and risk tolerances, our staff can recommend whether to take a non-passive approach or passive approach to meet not only the cybersecurity objectives, but also the total cost of ownership and time to value objectives. One of the things that we know with passive projects is that they tend to be rolled out over long periods of time, site by site, and that impacts the ability for an organization to get to steady state from an asset visibility perspective. And so the argument is with non-passive methods, you can really get going quickly. You don't have to have appliances shipped around the world. You get the program launched and off the ground quickly and kind of meet those cost and time objectives in addition to the cyber objectives. So those are two of the big things. The last thing I'll just throw out briefly is around what I call kind of the right for me delivery architecture. So some customers are open to the cloud, others that are in more critical infrastructure really aren't ready for that. And so we have versions of our platform. We can deliver it on-prem, we can deliver it for cloud as well. And so that right from the architecture can meet the risk constraints or the organizational or regulatory constraints that our customers have to operate within.
I mean, what I like especially about the research that we've done kind of to support these releases is just the ability to streamline kind of prioritization around exposures, around secure, around remote access, et cetera. clearly that spray and pray approach to vulnerability management, for example, just doesn't work anymore. And I think we're really demonstrating why and how we can support a different way forward.
Yeah, and I think so much of I think the initial stages of any new market's development, technologists come around and they figure out how to solve a problem, but it's usually throwing a lot of data at the customer, and they're not taking into account the customer's time, and how they get to the right answer quickly. So much of what we've done, for example, in exposure management is saying, look, traditional mindset around patching every critical vulnerability not only doesn't make sense in an IT environment, the physics of it can't work in an OT environment.
Right.
And so we're really trying to think about how we can give smart recommendations around what is exposed outside of the zone or what's exposed to the internet that is a risk. And I think when you cut the denominator down in orders of magnitude, it turns an intractable, unsolvable problem to one that can be solved quickly in a highly focused manner.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of as a last thought, Grant, I'm sure that the time to value, total cost of ownership arguments that we can make too are very attractive, and it's just a really strong package that I think we're bringing to users and customers.
Yeah, and I think in the past these solutions were one size fits all. That all of the vendors came in with a passive approach. You compared different vendors; they all had a high price tag associated with it, and to achieve your cybersecurity goals, you had to have a trade-off in terms of total cost of ownership and time to value. And I guess that's why we call the paper a non-zero sum game. Meaning that you can have your cake and eat it too. You can accomplish your cyber goals and also meet your total cost of ownership goals as well with this approach.
Great. Grant, good to see you again. Thanks for the conversation. I think this is great stuff.